Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to do just a brief video on hiring with intent. Okay, so I was speaking to a gentleman the other day that's up against some specific challenges at his company, and I'm going to go in and help him with those challenges. But some of the things that were kind of low-hanging fruit that could have been prevented, that's what I want to talk about here today. So around hiring people, you want to make sure you're hiring a person who's mentally in the right place to do a certain job for your company. So the best way to start down that path is look at the person's resume. Okay, on their resume, that's to suggest a history of roles that they are successful in and that they had the right attitude and mentality for, because it showed some length of term in those roles. That's why I tell people, if you're hiring, unless you're talking about true first step like starting positions, you should be hiring people for roles that have had that role consistently elsewhere. So they're not really changing jobs, they're changing employers. When you're doing that, that's kind of a best case scenario because you have a proven track record before you bring them on. Okay, so unless it's a starting position, like a brand new position that doesn't require someone to have experience, you want to hire based on the previous roles they've had, and you want to go by the jobs that they've had listed on their resume, and they should be changing employers and staying within the same job in the best case scenario. Okay, so if you use like a floor nurse, an RN, or someone like that that's been an RN somewhere else that's worked shift work as an RN, then that should suggest that that person would be a great shift work type RN at your company. Or if you've had an engineer in product development and they've been an engineer in product development elsewhere, then they're just changing companies if they come to your company. Once you get the pay stuff and sussed out and you see the history of that, that's what you're hiring for. So they've already occupied that role. But let's say you have like a general labor type position that has some necessary requirements around training, but you can use this as a position that you hire somebody right out of high school or right out of a trade school that actually have a trade based on the type of manufacturing that you do. You going to generally start those people in a starting general labor type position so they can learn the aspects around the job before they get promoted up into the role that they had their training for and their schooling for, possibly, if that's how you hire in those roles, because you want to have a person understand the whole breadth of the job before they're in a supervisor position over the job, etc. But on today's thought process, there are ways to tell mentally what type of functionality the person's going to have in the role. So one, go by their resume and look at their history. Their history suggests an understanding and a compliance to that role. So if they're a good fit for that role here and they've sustained in that position for years, then they should be a good role fit for you in your position. But there are several books that can help you with some of these items. So one, you can have people do a test, a personality test. It's not really a mental test; it's a personality test to see what traits drive them, and I'll go into some suggestions around that. But this book, the whole brain, it's a business book. The whole brain business book is what it's called. It talks about 4 different brain quadrants, which are we all have, but specifically one quadrant is more dominant. What's great about this book is it'll tell you, based on the dominance of how your brain works, which jobs are the best fit for you. And that is something that I think people should consider before they hire someone. For example, if someone is an engineer, they may not be a great leader because engineers deal with the math and the numbers and they see it clearly, but they don't know how to specifically build rapport with people or have understandings around what motivates folks and how you can talk to people to motivate them. So there's some suggestions around that on what jobs those people should fit in. But in this book, if you take a look at it, it's got a lot of great charts and graphs in it. But it tells you things like on this page, the chart there is telling you about personality traits, right? It tells you from each one, one's a rational self, one's an experimental self, one's a safekeeping self, and one's a feeling self. So basically, if we all have those 4 personality traits in our mind, depending on which one's more dominant, that would suggest which job we'd be a better fit for. It also goes on to say, well, in the rational family, somebody there is logical, analytical, fact-based, and quantitative, whereas in an organized family, someone there is organized, sequential, planned, and detailed. In a experimental family, someone is holistic, intuitive, and integrating and synthesizing. And then in the feeling family, someone's interpersonal, feeling based, kinesthetic, and emotional. So each one of those things has suggestions around the roles that the person would be good in, and it actually has some graphs and charts in here based on those quadrants, which roles are best served by people in those brain quadrants. So, prior to that, I'll go to this. In this book, it gives you those maps, right? And these on this page, for example, there's 4 maps. And it shows you on each one of these maps, there's skill sets that are based in the quartile of the personality type. So basically, it will tell you based on history and the known facts around these numbers on where people that test out to be a certain way will land on that graph and what jobs within that graph should be great for them. So, for example, in quadrant A, where people are more scientific, mathematical, statistical, problem finding, analyzing, logical problem solving, diagnosing, and articulating, the people that would have jobs that are in that are researching, computer science, technical science, analytical studies, financial jobs, diagnosing type jobs, critical jobs, challenging or construction jobs, managing or documenting, and communicating documentation and best practices, etc. So that quadrant would suggest those people need to be in those type jobs. So what you see is, from a tenure standpoint, from job situation, if you put the wrong person in the wrong quadrant, they're not going to last very long in that job. And even if they have all the intent to last a long time in that job, they may not be successful in that job because they don't have the personality traits to allow them to do so. So if you're hiring someone, be deliberate. Use the resume as number 1. Look into some of these items so it helps you tell things about how these personality traits are going to impact or perform inside your job to prevent that. It's not because people are being intentful about not doing things a certain way. It's just that mentally, when you have 2 different people look at something and they see it completely differently, and the statistics don't lie, so the history in those things from an assessment standpoint will tell you who's been successful in the past. Another book around this is if you're looking for a job and you're trying to figure it out, and it says on the back, do you hate your job? There's great things like this out here that are based around personality studies. So this book is called I Don't Know What I Want, But I Know It's Not This. And it says it's a step-by-step guide to finding gratifying work. This is by Julie Jensen. I actually did this myself, just out of curiosity. I did it for fun one afternoon. If you look in the pages, you'll see that I wrote numbers down and all that in here, and I can tell you where they fall in the charts. What ends up happening with this is it tells you and shows that based on the information in this, they fit equally. So you find out that those traits are indeed true, and that it can be true for you. But I would suggest that if you want to assess yourself and see which jobs might be a good fit, if you're tired of going through things where you feel like you're not finding the right job. And then here's another one. This is by Jeremy Kubrick and Steve Cockram. This is 5 voices, how to communicate effectively with everyone you lead, but it also tells you your leadership style, and it tells you the style of the people around you. So it says basically you have these voices. It's kind of like the brain book where it says you have these quadrants, and you have one dominant quadrant that's more dominant over others. This is the same thing. It suggests that there's voices that people have, and based on how they perform and how they respond and what type of things they hear, it tells you how to best fit your message to them, but also to put them in a role where they are best fit. So here are the voices type tool. This is what it says we have in us, and you can see there that there's 5 different suggestions, right? And in those 5 suggestions, you have pioneer, you have connector, you have guardian, you have a creative, and you have nurturer. And basically, within their personality, in their voices, this is how they're going to tend to handle situations. So, and some, like a pioneer, for example, would be braver, be more willing to go out and put themselves at risk. When someone who's like a nurturer, that wouldn't be what they do. They rather take care of people and do those type things. So here's the suggestion. Books like these exist, right? So you don't have to go into things blindly. You can actually learn from the statistics and the studies that are done in those books and use that thinking for what you're doing in your hiring roles, so you can make sure you're hiring the right person for the position that you have open. And I will say, the whole brain book, it definitely was worth the purchase, because that I've proven in my own career, those things are correct. That is how people think, and that's how that works out. And if you hire people within their dominant quadrant, that's the place where they feel most comfortable and they feel most heard. So that's going to be the place where they most likely will have the best performance. So inside this book, there's tons of matrix and graphs on how things line out for people and how they think. So if you're in hiring and firing, if you have your own company as an entrepreneur and you're doing things where you're hiring people for specific roles, look at those things. And if you're not, then hire somebody that's a consultant like myself or someone else to do that part of the job for you. Because basically, if you do that right, it suggests a longer tenure, right? And so when you think about opportunity cost of losing a good employee and the knowledge that they have, you want to sustain those people for as long as you possibly can to increase that tenure, because that's the better benefit to a company, right? So just think about those things. I hope that's useful to you. If you like videos like this, please subscribe. And please like, and we'll bring more stuff to you like this in the future. I am Ben. Be good.